Good evening, everyone. My name is Gretchen Roe, and it's a very great pleasure to spend a little bit of time with you all this evening. We're going to talk tonight about continuing to learn when school goes AWOL. And I know that many of you are right now in the midst of thinking, oh no, here we go again, with a COVID surge, with a school district that teachers are not confident in coming into the classroom, with a school district perhaps that has an inordinate number of students and educators who are out and unavailable to you. And now that becomes an emergency situation. So this evening, I want to talk to you about what can we do to keep some academics on track when life isn't normal, when school does indeed become absent without leave. And I come to you as a representative of Demme Learning, the parent publishing company for Math UC and Spelling UC, Analytical Grammar, and now as of the 1st of January, Write Shop. And we have a goal to help families continue to learn regardless of circumstance. So if you find yourself in a situation where all of a sudden what you have known to be a normal set of academics has been stood on its ears, so to speak, let's talk about what we can do in the next half an hour or so to set some timers and goals and practical experiential ideas for you to keep learning moving forward. I do have an agenda for you. I find that it's a practical way to keep me on task. And so let's talk about what that might look like. The first thing I want to talk about is anxiety. What is normal anxiety and what is the heightened anxiety that comes with our having the opportunity to think flexibly as far as learning is concerned. So I want to talk to you from a parent's perspective. I am the parent of 6. 5 of my students are now college graduates and on their own. And then our youngest in our household is a junior in high school. And then I also want to talk to you about what are some practicalities that you can think about in approaching your students' learning experiences. I want to talk to you about attention span. I want to give you some practical ideas of some things that you can do. This could be hours of conversation. I'm going to limit it to one idea for you this evening that you could do with your students to help keep their learning moving forward. And that's going to involve a little bit of detective work on your part. So we're also going to talk about mathematics. I think mathematics is probably the single most anxiety-provoking adventure in any academic life for a student. There are students who say they love math, but I have to tell you, I talk so much more often with students who say they struggle with math, they're anxious about math, that I think that it's important for us to have a conversation about, while school is not in its normal guise, what you might be able to do to help restore some normalcy for your student. And I want to give you some practical applications for that. I also want to talk to you about mathematical foundations, the expectations that we have as a society, the things that we think about, and maybe some of the myths I'd like to bust just a little bit. I also want to talk about what doesn't typically work when we're a parent sitting beside our student and wanting to see mathematical progress, and it's not necessarily there. You actually have an absolutely amazing opportunity, if school's not behaving normally right now, to change the mathematical game for your students. So let's talk a little bit about what that's like and what you might be able to entertain. Let's begin. I think the most important thing is to recognize that anxiety causes learning to cease. When a child is anxious, the brain actually shuts down. And when our brain shuts down, we don't have the opportunity to be able to fully understand what is happening around us. We don't have the opportunity to retain what we've learned. You may see a student who, once they've become anxious, they find themselves unable to learn and they have a meltdown, they become non-responsive, all sorts of crazy things happen. And so what I would like to do is, first of all, to frame for you all in the guise of things aren't normal, keep them in the affirmative. We as the parents are the captains of the ship. And if we're anxious, our children certainly feel that. And so what we need to do is we need to have a practical conversation with our children. And even the youngest of children, I think, have the ability to understand at a very sophisticated level that things aren't normal. So if we can have that conversation and say to them, hey, I know things are not behaving as we're used to. You're not going to school in a normal way. Let's talk about how you feel about those things. One of the most valuable things we can do as a parent is to help our kids frame how they feel about something and to be able to quantify their emotions surrounding it. Recognizing that in the presence of anxiety, learning is going to cease gives us the opportunity to make sure that at every opportunity, we can help our kids identify what makes them anxious and help them learn to step around it. In that process, I also want to talk to you as someone who has a background in working with kids who learn differently and have had the privilege for the last 8 years of working with some absolutely amazing researchers who work with kids all the time. And I want to help you understand something about your students' attention span. In a classroom, typically we look at a mathematical day and it lasts for an hour. But I want you to recognize that in that hour, the vast majority of that time is spent devoted to crowd control, gathering materials, gathering attention spans, getting everybody on the same sheet of music, if you will. So the truth of the matter is, when we are learning new information, we have an attention span that is our age plus 2 to 3 minutes. Why is that really important? Because that attention span is vital in the process for you as a parent in this period of time when things are not normal, to be able to recognize you can accomplish some learning, but you need to make it in small bites. And I think that small bite thing is something I want you to keep in the back of your mind, because we're going to talk again about that momentarily. So what can you do? What are the things you can talk about? Well, the first thing you have to think about is, what is the age of your student or students? Practical life lessons. You know what? If school is not happening, what are other things that we can do? I think there are a variety of practical life lessons that we fail to take into account, because particularly as life has become more frenetic, I know I, as a mother, like to keep the train moving forward. So I find myself doing a lot of things in my household that move the ball for the family, but don't allow my children the independence to be self-directed learners. So let's talk a little bit about what those kinds of practical life lessons are. Teaching your kids to clean the house, teaching your kids to run a vacuum. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but you'd be surprised in the number of conversations I've had with families in the last year, how infrequently that actually happens. How about how much time do you have to devote? If you are still a working parent and your child is now at home, what kind of time can you invest with that child? How about if you could invest 15 minutes a day to allow your child to have more successful mathematical experiences? That's thing number 2 I want you to keep in the back of your mind, because I'm going to bring that up again in just a moment. How about having an understanding of financial literacy? If you have a high schooler and school is out, how about You talk to them about a checkbook. A checkbook? What's a checkbook? Who uses a checkbook anymore? I know that I, in my household, probably write 2, maybe 3 checks a month. And usually it's to the high school because they somehow want the payments for athletics and extracurricular things to come in the form of a check. Very few of us write checks anymore, but you still do get bank statements. Sit down with your teenager, show them what a bank statement is, talk about the difference between credit and debit and those kinds of things. I think that's a very practical approach that you can take. You know what? Talking about interest, talking about accrued interest. If we did this kind of conversation effectively with our teenagers, there would be less payday loan companies in the US. And I think that makes a tremendous difference. Allow your student to accompany you to a trip to the grocery store. Talk about whether 3 cans of beans at 79 cents or 2 cans of beans at 89 cents are a better deal. Have them learn the practicalities of math while they're standing next to you. They want to buy a shirt. It's $20 and 20% off. How much off of that shirt are they actually going to get? That mental math capacity is a wonderful thing for us to be able to do. There's general life skills we can talk about as well. Everything from laundry to meal preparation to housekeeping. Now, there's a reason I stuck meal preparation in there, because when you prepare a meal, you have to use mathematics. You have to be able to calculate how many people you're going to serve, how many servings you need to have. Do you need to double the recipe? Do you need to have the recipe? Does that mean you need to engage with fractions? One of the most practical things we can do is to teach our children to cook. And I have to tell you, with kids ranging in age from 16 to 36, I'm really glad I taught my kids how to cook, because they are all fantastic cooks. And it means I don't have to do all the cooking experience. And I think now, with school being AWOL, would be a terrific time for you to be able to address those kinds of things with your children. Housekeeping. Oh, there's lots of housekeeping things we could do. And perhaps that's something that you bear the majority of in your household now. Maybe in this interim period of time while school is AWOL, there are some things that you can embrace as far as housekeeping is concerned that you can hand off to your children and teach them the practicalities. I'm reminded of a friend who was a college classmate years and years ago who had to go home from college on the weekends because her mom had never taught her how to do her own laundry. So that's a practical application that you can apply right here, right now with your students and still keep the ball moving forward. Now, I told you that I had a goal here, and my goal is to talk a little bit about mathematics. Mathematics causes a significant amount of anxiety for kids. And one of the things that COVID has taught us in the last year and a half, 2 years, is that the digital world is not the optimum for learning mathematics. Why is that? Well, let's talk a little bit about the language of mathematics. And you might have this child who sits across the table from you. Mathematics is a language that we either learn to speak well or less well. We either are comfortable with it or perhaps we're slightly uncomfortable with it. I was that person, not the comfortable mathematician. In fact, I made decisions all the way into my adulthood based on my mathematical hesitancy. And if you can do anything for your student while school is not normal, giving your child greater mathematical confidence might be the best goal you can accomplish. The language of mathematics is specific. And often, if we're uncomfortable mathematically, we don't want to have that language conversation with our students. We want them to be able to figure it out for ourselves. I'm often asked by parents, at what age can my child be mathematically independent? And that varies widely because it depends on the student, it depends on the student's motivation, it depends on how the student really feels about math. But I think it's practical to think that in all reality, You're not going to be able to be independent mathematically until you're about 9 or 10 years old. You're going to have to be able to have a conversation, and even into high school and adulthood, in that mathematical language, we need to be able to play off of one another and verify our assumptions and have a collaborative experience. So if you can come alongside your student and help them with understanding the math that's presented with them to them, then they're going to have a better experience. The challenge that so many of us have is that math that's being presented in school in this day and age doesn't look like what we did, does it? I know that I have been presented with math over the last couple of years as my son has been in public school, and I have no idea what the mathematical goal is. So being able to help him interpret that accurately has been a real adventure. So let's talk about the foundations of math and what we might be able to do as parents to help our kids cultivate that mathematical language. Here's a myth that I want to share with you all, and parents say this to me all the time: oh, my child just simply can't memorize. The truth of the matter is, it's very rare to have a student who absolutely cannot memorize facts. And when I say this to parents, I'll say, you mean to tell me that your student remembers nothing? They have Dory memory. If you'll remember Dory from Finding Nemo, she had a 2-second memory and she forgot everything. If that's really the case and your student cannot memorize, then there's also nothing that they can wax eloquent about. But I'd be willing to bet that there is something that in your student's life where their high interest and their high need meet, and they can tell you all about it. It might be Minecraft, it might be dinosaurs, it might be Pokemon, it might be chess, any variety of things, but there's something your student finds fascinating and they can tell you all about it. If that's really the case, then we can create mathematical literacy in our students by creating a desire in them and helping them learn. Usually when a student struggles with mathematics, it's because they have a weak foundation. Kids can learn their facts. We just don't always give them the easiest way to accomplish that. So how can we make that more practical? Remember, I've already said your child has an attention span of their age plus 2 to 3 minutes. So your instruction with them, your interaction with them about mathematics needs to be brief. How do you separate word problems from computational problems? I have parents who say to me all the time, oh, my student can do computational math, but when it comes to word problems, everything just falls apart. If we can help our students become comfortable with word problems, then while school is AWOL, we have accomplished an enormous feat. And when they return to the normalcy, they'll be more confident. And I think that is really an essential thing for us as parents to think about. We also do need to make mathematics practical. I'll give you an example of this. I used to do this with my kids, and now that as adults, they roll their eyes, but they did catch on very quickly. We were a one-income family. We could not often afford something like pizza, but it was a treat. And when it was, I would always take one of my children with me when we went to go pick up that pizza. Frankly, I was too cheap to pay to have pizza delivered. So we'd ride to the pizza shop to pick it up. And I would say to my children, as I started to pay for the pizza, all right, I'm about to pay for this pizza and I'm going to give them $20. I want you to tell me, if the cost of the pizza is $18.75, how much change am I going to get back? And if you can tell me before they give the change back to me, then you can have the change. That's incentivizing learning. And I think it's a very practical way for us to help kids stay engaged in that process. That gives kids the ability to see math that may be something very ephemeral and ethereal, and I don't understand. in very practical terms. And I think incentivizing kids in that way makes a tremendous amount of difference. If you have a student who's home with you for a period of time and there are mathematical issues, where do you begin? And I'm going to return to something I've already said. What do you do about mathematical anxiety? Where do we struggle? How does that fear of math and that anxiousness that comes with mathematics happen? Sometimes it's the pace, the fact that the class moves on and you feel like you're the only one who doesn't understand. Or maybe we have inadvertently set our kids up because we've said, oh, he or she is very creative. They're not very mathematically minded. I'm here to tell you that creativity and mathematics are two sides of the same coin, and we need to give kids facility with math. Maybe you might see yourself as I was, where you had a student who sat on either side of you and they were very mathematically proficient and I was not. So I felt like I was less. And I took that less feeling all the way to my adulthood. When anxiety is present, then we avoid things. And our goal should be to help our kids be able to define their anxiety so that they can remove it from their experience and be able to be successful. So let's talk about what do we have to do in order to help a student be successful. And remember, you cannot learn when you are stressed. Often when we have the opportunity to spend some time at home with our children and we find that there is something that they are not proficient in, we revert to the things that we knew that helped us. What am I talking about with that? Well, one of them I'm talking about would be flashcards. There's a variety of things we do when we have kids who we feel don't have an accurate interpretation of math. They aren't mathematically proficient. And those things that we do don't necessarily offer us a good outcome. What do I mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. When I have a child who is really struggling mathematically, often in my experience, the first step there is to pull out a flashcard and say, hey, let's do flashcards so we can become more proficient. But flashcards don't teach. They only help you become more proficient at what you already know. And they can inadvertently create for us an anxiety that wasn't there before. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I hold up a flashcard and I say to you, hey, what's 6 times 7? And you say 42, I'm like, terrific. What's 7 times 9? And you say, I might say, oh, come on, you knew this yesterday. Which from my perspective as the parent, I really want you to get this. But from the student's perspective, I just introduced anxiety into the equation. And as I've already told you this evening, once anxiety is present, learning ceases. Often in an academic experience, particularly in a classroom, someone has set goals for that class outside the bounds of the control of the instructor. And so the class continues to move forward regardless of whether the student understands or not. And once the student is left behind, it becomes very difficult to play catch up. A lot of public school, private school, parochial schools are presently engaged in the process of, okay, I got to get you to the end game and I don't know how to get you there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you a calculator and I'm going to say, here's a calculator. I want you to use this to do your computational math facts. And so if I now have to go in and say 6 times 7 equals, okay, I have an answer there. Of course, the answer is going to be 42, but it takes time to do that. And if you have a student who is approaching middle school or even in high school, and they're using a calculator to get to that answer, they're not going to be able to perform sufficiently on a standardized test like an ACT or an SAT in order to reach those goals of a college experience. We want to help our kids be proficient. We want to help our kids accomplish whatever they want to do. And it's because we love our children. And when we love them, sometimes we feel like whatever the school says, that's what we have to do. Here's something I want to help you understand. You, as the parent, are the most qualified person to help your student learn. And so in this period of time where life might not be normal, there might be the opportunity for you to change some things and help your student have a more successful experience. Another thing that we see often in school districts is the ability to use something like touch point math. So with a younger student, we might say 3 and they touch the 3 times, plus 4 and they touch the 4 times is 7. The challenge with that is that's not really addition, that's counting. And every time we have to count to calculate for a fact, we have to step away from the problem we're engaged in order to accomplish the counting process. A 6-year-old counting to come up with a fact is an adorable thing. A 12-year-old is not. So I want to encourage you as a parent, if there's one thing you can do while school's not behaving normally, it is to help right your students' mathematical ship. How do we do that? What do we need to do? Well, the key is diagnostics. And that comes with knowing what your student knows, and more importantly, knowing what your student doesn't know, because that gives you the opportunity to then say, hey, this is fine. At least we know exactly where we are, and we know what kind of gaps we need to fill to make it a more profitable experience. Let's say that school takes a month to become normal again. If you had a month to give your student more mathematical confidence, would that be something that you would be willing to invest for them? And I think most of us would probably say yes. So how do you figure that out? What kind of diagnostics do I need? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? What do I need to be able to do in order to figure out where my student is? And the truth is, you need to have a conversation with someone at Demme Learning. You can reach out to us. You can contact a placement specialist. You can call the number that you see on the screen. You can take that link that I have provided for you, write it down, send an email. You can live chat us during the workday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. We want your students' success. We'd like to help you have a successful experience. And when life is not normal, here's the opportunity to change the game so that when life becomes normal again, your student has a greater degree of success. I know that probably I have said some things that require you to think, and maybe you have some questions. And so I'm going to stop the PowerPoint now, and I'm going to answer some common questions that people ask of me. And then if there are further questions, I have the chat here. I'm happy to monitor the chat. And if you have questions, I'd love for you to put them in the chat and let me be able to answer them for you. I promised you that I would give you a half an hour of practicality as far as what you can do for your student. And I have met that obligation. Now what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the questions that parents often ask us. How do I know if my student's struggling? If you are watching a student who is engaged for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, trying to accomplish a math lesson, and they are frustrated, you know that there's some sort of struggle. So it's important for us to figure out, where does that struggle begin, and maybe how can we make it end? The next question that parents often ask of us is, how much time am I going to have to invest to right the ship? And the truth of the matter is, I'm going to go back to that age plus 2 to 3 minutes. That makes a tremendous amount of difference for students. And I think that you will find that in 15 minutes a day, you can make an enormous amount of progress to help your student be more mathematically successful. And other questions that parents often ask of us is, if I have seen my student struggle, but I'm not sure what that struggle looks like, how do I determine what that is? And that's why placement diagnostics are an essential part of figuring out a game plan. My goal here tonight is not to answer every question for you. My goal is to give you a practical idea of how you might be able to accomplish something while your school system is not in normal operations, to be able to help your student be more successful when they return to school. And what you might find in that process is that you really enjoy the interaction that you have with your student, and maybe you want to continue that interaction further. The folks at Demme Learning have worked with families for over 35 years. All of us who are here strive to help families be academically successful. Maybe math isn't what you want to talk about. Maybe you have a child who's struggling with spelling. We're happy to have a conversation with you about that, but that wasn't my goal this evening. I think one of the most important things that we can do for our families is to give our students the ability to keep as many options open for themselves as possible. I often have conversations with parents of teenagers, and they'll tell me that their teenagers are struggling in math, and maybe college isn't a proposition for them. Maybe they don't know what they want to do. And I always say to parents, the most important thing is to keep the door wide open. So if you have a child who has struggled in the past mathematically, or is struggling right now, it begins with a conversation. And I have to tell you that often at Demme Learning, we have conversations with parents who have tried all sorts of things. And by the time they get to us, they're really frustrated. And we want to alleviate that frustration. Here in the chat, Crystal has asked a terrific question. She says she has an 11-year-old son who struggles with memorizing his multiplication facts, and it affects his multi-digit multiplication. She's diagnosing and evaluating him mathematically this year. So what are some suggestions for memorizing facts? And I'm so glad you asked the question, Crystal, because the truth of the matter is sometimes the problem with multiplication facts isn't multiplication. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but what we have found in working literally with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families over the last 5 years, very intentionally, to figure out where the wheels come off the wagon and how a child struggles, is that often that struggle doesn't begin with where the struggle presents itself. For instance, parents will often say to me, multiple digit multiplication is just a nightmare. I can't figure out why on earth my student is struggling so much. And the truth is, that's not where the struggle began. It began perhaps with unmemorized math facts, or maybe it began with addition and subtraction facts that aren't memorized. Because in multiple digit multiplication, you have to be able to multiply, but you also have to be able to add. And every time we don't have something that is succinct and clear, we have to step away in order to do something, whether it's the practicality of using a calculator, or it is that touch point math, or some other capacity. Sometimes we'll have students who do have their addition and subtraction facts committed to memory, and they got to multiplication and they learned how to skip count, and that's where it ended. So if you say to your student, what's 6 times 5? And they say, oh, I know, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. That's still counting. Even though they got to the right answer, that hesitancy, that length of time it takes them to get to the answer becomes problematic. One of the things that we have done at Demme Learning is we have worked with a great deal of intention with parents for the last 5 years now to figure out where the wheels come off the wagon and how we can put them back on. And one of the things that we learned that parents actually taught us is that it's not always where the child's struggle begins that is the root cause of the struggle. So if you have, as Crystal has asked, a student who has struggle with memorizing facts, the first thing we have to do is figure out, is it just multiplication or does it begin with addition and subtraction? Because mathematics is sequential and cumulative. And when we have a student who is having a mathematical challenge with a particular concept, that usually is rooted in someone else, someplace else, some earlier concept that they didn't grasp successfully. I'll give you two quick examples of that. The first one is often parents will find a child who rocks along pretty steadily until they get to long division, and then all of a sudden the wheels blow right off the wagon. And you think, what on earth has happened here? The truth is, when we get to long division, we have to be able to bring three sets of skills to the table. We have to bring addition, subtraction, and multiplication to the table in order to divide larger numbers. And if any of those foundational skills are weak, then we're going to struggle. So when you see that struggle begin, now's the time to have a practical conversation. Now, Crystal had said that she was homeschooling her student, and you know what? Sometimes that is a difficult proposition, because when we're one-on-one with our children every day, they want us to be happy, and they will go to extraordinary lengths to pretend they know something they don't really know. So one of the most liberating things we can do is to say to a student, hey, it's okay that you don't understand. That's the beginning of change for us, is knowing what you don't know so we can now fix it. Here's another place that kids often struggle. Sometimes parents will see that struggle doesn't begin until they get to Algebra 1. And all of a sudden, Algebra 1 becomes so phenomenally difficult that parents say, oh, does my student have a mathematical disability? I will tell you, I have been asked that question so many times over the last 8 years. Most of the time, it's not a disability, it's just a lack of a foundational skill set. I'll give you another practical example. If you're weak in fractional understanding, being able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions, then you're going to really struggle in algebra. And so sometimes the diagnostics, depending on the age of the student, include our being able to assess a student and figure out what do they know with regard to fractions. I will tell you that no one teaches fractions as adroitly as Matthew C. teaches fractions. And I feel like I can say that in the 21 years that I homeschooled my 6 children, we used 12 different mathematics curricula. And I have to tell you, I didn't understand fractions until I learned fractions the way Matthew C. teaches fractions. The practicality of being able to bring more than one sense to the table as you study something cannot be underestimated. The ability to be able to bring as many senses as possible to the table so that you have a clear understanding of something is a huge game changer for so many kids. And so if you have a child who is struggling in one of those areas, we would encourage you to reach out to us. We would love to be able to help you. There's no obligation for you to call and speak with one of our placement specialists. Our goal is to see that you have a successful experience. So if you have a child who's temporarily home, or if you are a longtime homeschooling family, please know that Demme Learning has a goal to see that you have a successful experience. What does that look like? What are those goals involve? Well, whatever the goal is for Crystal might be different than the goal would be for me, for my child, or the goal would be for someone else for their child. Goals are personal. They are between you and your student, and we're only here as facilitators to help you meet those goals. One of the things I think that is so important to bear in mind is we want kids to keep mathematical doors open. We want them to be able to see the world in its fullness and what they might be able to accomplish, instead of being afraid as I was as a teenager, that I was going to have to do something that did not involve any math. And I actually went to extraordinary lengths to pick a college degree that I thought had as little mathematics as possible. There is no college degree that doesn't involve math of some way, shape, or form. I'm here to tell you, I did lots of research. So being able to give our kids that practicality and that help in that process is a huge game changer for students. I'd like to encourage you that while things aren't normal, while things don't seem normal, there's a lot of normalcy to be had. And for you to be able to say to your student, hey, let's take a little bit of time and let's figure out how we can make this time truly profitable for ourselves is such an enormous game changer. I'm going to put up one slide before we conclude one more time, just so that you have information in case you would like to be able to reach out to us. And that is our 800 number, our websites, our support email contact link, any of those things. We would love to be able to have the opportunity to have a conversation with you. Let me also say before we conclude this evening that it's not a forever experience. I think it's really important to understand that if you have a child that's struggling, you would be amazed at the things that will fall in place behind writing a singular struggle. Often parents will say to me when they have an older student, and I say to them, the root struggle for your student is their addition and subtraction facts. Parents will say to me, oh my word, I can't go all the way back to there when I have a 15-year-old student. But you would be amazed at how often going back to there and solving that one issue for your student allows so many more things to fall in place. It doesn't mean that we're going to repeat years and years of mathematics. It means we're going to solidify a foundation for your student so that they can move forward with confidence. You know, if you were building a house, you would want that house to have a solid foundation. And when a foundation is weak, it's very hard to feel like we're successful. So taking a little bit of time right now to be able to help your student have more mathematical success might be the best time you can possibly invest. We'd love to be able to help you. We hope that you join us in giving us a call. There's no obligation. We'll have a conversation. We'll see if we can make it practical and help you feel successful in your student's journey. Thank you all for trusting me this evening, for spending a little bit of time with me. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'd really love to help. And I wish you the joy of the journey. Children are young for just a little bit of time. And it seems to me like yesterday, my eldest was a tiny tot, and now she's the mother of 3. And it's amazing how quickly time changes. Thank you all for being here with me this evening. I'll look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care, everyone.